All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another episode of the DevOps Insight Forum. I'm Sam Fell. The DevOps Insight Forum is a monthly open space for professionals to chat about software development, delivery, and reliability. And today we're talking about chaos engineering. DevOps is all about safe experimentation and feedback loops. Chaos engineering is all about purposefully triggering a software failure in production in order to build confidence and resilience. How do DevOps teams leverage chaos engineering to deliver better customer experiences? Join us as we discuss how chaos can uncover failure before it impacts customers, how to get your teams on board with chaos, and using chaos as a way to train teams and improve performance. I'm joined by a fantastic panel of folks, some of them who've been here before and some of them who are new. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. Mitch, welcome back.
Sam, good to be seen. Good to see you again, and good to see this great panel. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'm principal with Textron Research, analyst firm, focused on DevOps, cybersecurity, cloud native, and appropriate technologies we're talking about today, and also serve as the CTO for the company that hosts events like this. So great to be here, and really enjoy working with you and the Sumo team, and looking forward to this conversation.
Nice. Very good. All right. Next up, Emily, another familiar face. Welcome back.
Yes, thank you for having me again. I always love these panel conversations, and I'm really excited for the chaos engineering topic. It really puts the science back in computer science, as kind of kitschy as that is. But I'm a global ecosystem leader at Red Hat, and I've spent the last 10 years helping our customers adopt DevOps and start their digital transformation journeys. And chaos engineering is such a key part of that next step.
Love it. Great. Glad to have you joining us again. Thanks for being here. Bruno, you're up.
Hello, everyone. Good to see everybody. Good to see many of you again. I'm Bruno. I'm one of the co-founders of Sumo Logic and head of strategy. We do, at Sumo, we are an observability and security platform, cloud native. And we help our customers with some of these concerns of reliability, security of their applications and digital services.
Awesome. Glad to see you again. Bryce, welcome, sir.
Yeah. Bryce Lindsay. I'm with Alaska Airlines. I'm on the site reliability engineering team, where for the e-commerce side of the business. And I care about all things reliability, and chaos engineering is one of my favorite tools in my toolbox. So happy to be here to geek out over it.
I love that. And you were actually the inspiration for this. If anyone is more interested in learning about what he did at Alaska Airlines to introduce this, we have a video up on the website. We can send you to that when we're done with this. It's awesome. So Bryce, happy to have you here. And last but not least, Brad, introduce yourself.
Hey, thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me. Excited to join on this topic particularly. I work with AWS. I'm the category leader for DevOps for Marketplace, which means I work with every company that's providing tools and services and practices in DevOps. I ran marketing for a company called Gremlin, who is kind of a chaos engineering tool, and spent many years prior to that in test automation and CI/CD, so really focused on everything related to making developer productivity better and end users more satisfied. So chaos engineering came on the scene and really made a big difference. And excited to talk about it.
That's great. And I thought of you as soon as this topic came up. I'm like, gotta talk to Brad, since you were over at Gremlin, you know a thing or two, which is fantastic. So, and I'm seeing the chat blow up, which is awesome. Thank you, everybody, for digging in and letting us know where you're from. I did see something scroll by. Someone was asking for some captions, which is a fantastic idea. I don't know if we have that. Cody is our operator, and he's standing by. Maybe we can turn those on. If not, apologies, but it's an excellent suggestion for the Big Marker team to get something like that going. I can see how that would be helpful. All right. So I want to say, speak up. Everybody's already in the chat, which is fantastic. This forum is for you. We have these panelists here with quite a bit of experience in this, so ask your questions. We have some topics that we thought we would cover, but we would much rather cover topics that you bring up if they're relevant to the conversation. Be respectful. If you are disrespectful, we'll just pull you out of the event, and share your feedback. If there are things that we're not doing or things that we are doing that you think we can change or do better, we're a continuously improving organism, and so we'd love to hear your feedback. And with that, as part of every one of these, we work with the folks at TechStrong and DevOps.com to do a poll. So we have some polls that we had put up on DevOps.com. We're going to go through some of that. But before we go through the data from DevOps.com, we're going to ask you, the audience, where do you typically practice chaos engineering? And I know where I practice it, and so I'm going to submit. I'm not going to tell you what I said because I don't want to sway. And I think I saw some previous panelists also in the audience, so I'm super happy to see them. I think it's Michael. Michael, nice to see you. All right, we'll give people a few minutes, and then we'll show what the answers are. Love the community. I mean, if folks are out there and you know about the Insight Forum, you know that we're talking directly to the audience. So I'm glad to see so many people returning to these, because it's sort of like a cult following, kind of a nice core group of folks who are constantly chatting us up. All right, Cody, how are we doing on the answers here? In QA and pre-production. Okay. Very, very interesting. Where do you practice chaos engineering? In development? No. In QA pre-production, that makes a lot of sense. In production, not a lot, which makes sense. And only 24% of you saying nowhere, we're not crazy, right? So that is super interesting. This does not align at all with what we saw on the DevOps.com site. So it appears as though we've got a self-selected group of people who are already pretty comfortable with chaos engineering, who've decided to join us to learn a little bit more about it, which is fantastic. Again, I think that's going to make for a very rich chat conversation.
Probably a little bit of selection bias based on who attended, right?
Exactly. Folks who are comfortable with the topic are probably more likely to be here.
It is still true that most of it is, most people are not doing in production.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was wrong. Yeah, good point, Bruno.
Which makes sense, and I think that's probably a good practice, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the event, which is cool. All right, so what platform do you use to perform your chaos engineering? And Cody has snapped right on with the polls. Thank you. I'm going to answer this. Oh, actually, I think it's this. Because Bruno did some research, so I can actually answer truthfully about what my organization is doing.
We're overloading our contribution to the statistical analysis of this data. One of us should answer.
Okay.
I think we have a filter for that, Bruno, so it's okay.
The Sam filter? That's smart. That's a good idea. Just take whatever he says and just like put it aside. All right. So a lot of people with open source and a lot of people who aren't doing it. So either they're using open source or they're really not doing it. Is kind of how
11% commercial.
Comes down.
About the same homegrown too.
Yeah. About 20% of them doing homegrown or commercial, and the rest open source. And I would sort of say open source kind of has some homegrown in it as well. So I don't think you can just plug it in and it just works. But maybe I'm wrong. Again, take what I say and put it aside. All right, let's see what the rest of the DevOps.com community said. Homegrown, open source, again, a big number. So very similar findings, which is interesting. A lot of the open source stuff and a lot of folks that just aren't doing it yet, which is fine, right? And then what release management processes do you have in place? So you can select all that apply. And so I'm going to do that. Then we'll see what we get. Yeah, we got people from all over the world on this thing. It's so great.
We do, Sam, everywhere.
I like it. All right. Votes in. Everybody. What release management process do you have in place? Continuous deployment. All right. 35%. Very good. Brad is clapping. I like it. Canary deployments in blue, green, AB. There's a sizable number of that. And then non-continuous or scheduled deployments. So just your typical standard every month or whatever is how it sort of goes, which is interesting. But I guess the other answer there was most of the time that this chaos engineering is done in pre-production environments. And so you put something in the pre-production and you play with it, you break it, keep it there for a while. So that's interesting. Let's see what, oh, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying interesting that continuous and non-continuous are about the same in our audience.
Saw that. I thought that was interesting as well. Right?
Yeah.
I think it represents, kind of where people are. I mean,
Yeah, pretty real.
Right. And it's very similar across the entire DevOps.com audience as well, the general population. Again, those are the two highest ones. These ones are a little bit more of the outliers because it's a little bit more advanced, advanced topic, advanced math.
Yeah, I think the other, probably more older school stuff is much less for this audience here.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Couple of percentage points.
Exactly. Awesome. So that's really interesting. Some interesting data there. And thank you all for participating and letting us know where you are. And now let's get into the conversation and talk about chaos engineering and like what it is and why are people doing it. And I told the panelists before we started that I was going to randomly pick somebody. And Bryce, I'm going to randomly pick you. You've done a whole video on it, so this would be like a no-brainer for you. So Bryce, what is, in your opinion, what's chaos engineering and why did you start to pursue it at Alaska Airlines?
Yeah, so for me, chaos engineering is breaking things on purpose to find out how they work, how they break, so that you can identify issues and take action to shore things up so that they don't break at like 2 a.m. and wake you up. And that's also kind of
you're shifting the pain left to when you're awake.
Yeah. And when we're awake and alert and can think straight.
Nice.
We kind of take the approach of setting up an event where we target a system or a few systems, and we'll go through several different experiments that we come up with. We'll break it, observe it, make note, move on. And then after we get to the end of that, we kind of review everything, all of our notes and learnings, talk about it, and come away with action items.
Nice. And so as you mentioned, the why was in your answer. It's sort of to make those systems shift that left and to make it more resilient, and then to figure out what kind of improvements that you could make to keep that problem from happening naturally, and how to solve the problem more quickly. Let's see, Emily, thoughts on this with the clients that you were working with?
Yes. Ooh, sorry. Yeah. So I completely agree with Bryce. Really, it's about putting the scientific process and being intentional where you're breaking things. So creating that hypothesis is super important when you're dealing with chaos engineering. The one thing I tell my clients is you're just doing unplanned chaos engineering in production now. Acting like nothing ever breaks doesn't help anyone. Where people think that they're doing the chaos planning essentially is in the very beginning of the design process, where it's, oh, we need these redundant systems and this will protect us, but they don't necessarily test that ever. And they don't test their assumptions that these things will always work. And so really it's about just what do they call it in chaos engineering? Limiting the blast radius. So really identifying where you can break things and what you expect the impact to be. And yeah, with chaos engineering, if you're not doing it today, you're doing it unintentionally today.
Yeah, if you're not doing it on purpose, you're still doing it. Just
Yes, exactly.
You're just getting the chaos part, not the engineering part.
Yes.
That's brilliant. I love that too. That's another quote that we have to make sure that we capture. But I love what you said earlier, which is putting the science back into computer science. It's really having that hypothesis, as you mentioned, running the experiment, observing the results, and then changing what you're doing, right? Changing a variable, not all the variables, which I think is, excuse me, which I think is fantastic. Brad, what are your thoughts on this coming from your background?
Yeah, I appreciate both answers. I think using scientific method is a key approach. Coming from the company I used to work for, right, we had a lot of fun marketing, right, around these concepts. But I think when you get into practice, keyword is practice, right? This is something that you're going to begin implementing regularly, right? And it's something that you make part of your approach to building software. And the most important thing is, what are you doing? Why are you doing this, right? You're doing this to build reliability. You're doing it to increase the velocity of your ability to put new features into production without causing massive, disruption. And you are reducing risk. I love the fact that you are breaking things. You're introducing failure to the system to reduce the risk. And I think somebody said the word training, right? You're training your teams to expect things to go wrong and to minimize the impact of those things when they do. I think that's the biggest change between. I spent a lot of years in testing, where you tested things that you kind of think about, whereas chaos engineering introduces failure, and you discover things that you didn't know you were going to discover, right? And it's about controlling that and introducing those small problems, right, and identifying where those risks happen. That is why it usually starts in dev and test, right? Because people don't want to start in production. Nobody recommends that, but I think anybody in the space will tell you need to end up there. You need to actually end up to a point where you are doing this in production environments very carefully. Right?
Interesting. I love that point. Okay, very good. Let's see, Bruno, what are your thoughts on this definition and why?
Yeah, I think lots of good thoughts here already. I would say that there's a lot of failure modes that we can imagine. Like, modern applications are built with dependencies and all kinds of things, like cloud services, third-party software, commercial services that you don't run and things like that. A lot of your own stuff as well. And, but a lot of these are pretty reliable, right? You don't get a chance to test what happens when they break that often. Like, think about running on AWS. Now, what happens when S3 fails? Well, let me see. When did it fail last time, right? So a lot of these scenarios could be pretty catastrophic and are not that hard to imagine, but they don't happen often. So, I think it's one of the methods that can help you kind of engineer that scenario and really understand the failure modes and build resiliency and build sort of workarounds for these kinds of failures. And I think, that's one of the things that we've learned ourselves, through these sort of intermittent, infrequent issues that we've faced. And we're like, oh, what if the other thing failed? What do we do then, right? And so, that's another benefit, I think, of chaos engineering.
Love that. All right, Mitch, what are your thoughts here?
I'm not going to repeat because I think everyone did a great job. I would just add to say it's intentionally putting the plane into a flat spin and recovering. That condition you don't want to happen, you make it happen so you can make sure you can recover.
Right. And, Brad mentioned it. I'm not sure who mentioned it before him, but that training, that muscle memory of helping people be comfortable with the chaos, right? I think that's also an important point of this, to not have them go into a panic when this is happening. All right. So people, process, where do you get started? Like, what is the best way to introduce this into an organization? Let's see. And we'll start. I'm not going to start with you again, Bryce, because that would be just like unfair. Emily, I'm going to start with you. What are you seeing?
So there's a lot of different ways to get started with chaos engineering. The easiest way I would say is if you're already monitoring your system and know where failures happen, even if there's, I would go after the most minor of failures where it's like, oh, after we have so many requests, maybe we have a 404 error or something like that, and then it self-recovers. So no one really cared about it. Well, see how that actually happened, force that in pre-production or actual production, and start to build the process around that piece. And so then if you can really show those quick wins and potentially big wins through the process, then you'll be able to get other people on board. And if that's completely not possible because of the word chaos in general, then start with the people side of chaos engineering. Force someone to do a staycation and start to do exercises with the people on your team of what happens if they're not available. Can we actually handle moving forward? And what happens if someone is intentionally, unintentionally fat fingering all day? You know, these types of things happen, but actually planning for that, then you can show the value of the process of chaos engineering without necessarily having as big of an impact. And then that will convince people over time, like, this is why you need to do it from the people side and from the technology side, and really get people on board through these stories.
To limit that blast radius, as you sort of talked about earlier, but still give people a sense of, hey, we're making progress. We understand this, how it's working. Excellent. I like that. Brad.
Yeah, you don't have to go crazy, right? So I think find a utility to use all the disk space. There's a chaos test to try, right? What happens when you run out of disk space? Do you know the answer to that today? Right? It's, you know, when we look at using homegrown tools or open source tools or commercial tools, there's things you can do right in the command line that are chaos tests, right? So think about, you know, what are the simple things you can try on your own laptop to begin thinking about chaos. Chaos is all about coming up with a hypothesis, right, and then testing it. So it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to take down the whole stack, right? It's really a mindset. It's a shift in, okay, well, I've got to create a unit test that validates that my function works. All right, every good engineer on the planet does that all the time, and that's a joke. But the point is, you know, it's just thinking about how to really think differently about failure. If you think about failure is going to happen, what are the common things that are going to happen? There's a question about code or systems, right, or architecture. Yes, they will all fail, right? So if you just continue to think about the small things that can introduce chaos in a very controlled environment, you're just going to develop a mindset, and do that with your team. And then ultimately, we want to get to what Justin mentioned in the chat. Get into a practice of game days, right, where the team is working for a week to design, you know, these game days or more, and coming in again regularly and running these game days. Very common AWS practice. You know, just search on it and you'll find all kinds of information about how to do it. And it is one of the fundamental operations where you can begin introducing chaos engineering. So it's one of the things where you want to strive to, you know, begin there, right? Start to doing that.
Yeah, and I think you were mentioning it was Shabam. I'm probably saying your name incorrectly, and I'm sorry if I am. But is it only for finding faults is chaos engineering for finding faults in the application failures or in the infrastructure failures? And like you said, I think it's for finding anything that's going to cause the system to not do well. And Ricardo, it's not for finding faults, but analyzing the system's response to the fault, which I think is also a very important point. So thank you all for sort of chiming in. We appreciate that. Let's see. Bryce, what are your thoughts here? How did you go about getting people comfortable with this crazy idea of chaos engineering at Alaska Airlines? When people think of Alaska Airlines, they don't want to think about chaos. So.
No. So when I started driving it, my first thought was to to tackle the low-hanging fruit, the easy systems that would be easy to work with, because we didn't have a tool to use. So we started out doing it as a homegrown approach. And I was encouraged to take a different approach, which I'm glad I did, and target the really critical systems, like the shopping system, the home page, the stuff that's most important. And by targeting those, after having just a couple of game days with good success, we were able to show the value and get people excited and pumped. One of my favorite experiences was with the homepage. We ran a game day with that, and the team learned that if the Redis cache went down, the homepage went down, and nobody expected that. They thought, "Oh, it's just a Redis cache. It's just a cache. It's no big deal." But it was terrible, and so they documented that. And it was a few weeks later that problem actually happened in production, and the team was able to mitigate it within minutes, as opposed to prior to that, it would have taken hours to figure out what was going on and get it fixed.
Because there was no obvious connection in your head that those two things were linked.
No.
But you had practiced it and you knew. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. I think another one of the things I really like from the people side is like onboarding. Like, not everybody knows every system really well, and you get new people that come on. Sometimes applications change ownership. They shuffle around teams during reorgs. And so you'll end up with some teams that just don't know all of their systems really well. But by running these chaos experiments, getting everybody together, everybody gets to learn about the systems that they own. And I think that's really valuable.
And learning in a way, the easiest way I think for people to learn is through playing. And when you put them in a sandbox that allows them to play and make mistakes, like I learn more by ruining things and then fixing it than I do by just reading a manual, right? And so you're right. I think that's a great way for folks to get comfortable with something that they're not familiar with, is like, well, what does this do? Oh, damn, I shouldn't have done that, right? So that's great. I love that. Mitch, what are your thoughts on this process?
I think it's technology and process and people. So much revolves around our assumptions that we make. And I think we can learn some things from even going back to disaster recovery processes, right? Where we look at the assumptions that we are making. Let's assume that someone can make it to the building to turn off this whatever if this bad condition happens. Well, what happens if someone can't come into the building? Same kind of thing. What are our assumptions about the homepage, or about the cache, or about our application, or we're never going to run out of memory because we're in the cloud and it's infinitely scalable? Well, it's not really. All of those things, because there's ways that those things can be exhausted. So start with the assumptions and the things that we think are well covered with what happens when they're not, because there are conditions where they may not be. And I like what you said, Bryce, about kind of pick realistic things too. We're not looking for the most extreme edge case, corner case necessarily. You might go there, but it's also make it real by experimenting, right? Take what you know and then look at what you don't know next. So you'll learn a lot, right?
Yeah, that's great. All right, Bruno, thoughts on this process or people? Where do you start with this?
Look, I'll just maybe touch on culture. I think a lot of challenge for a lot of companies and folks is just, embracing the crazy, like when we talk about things like chaos and things like, even pushing code to production all the time, right? Continuously. It's not necessarily what we've been taught over the decades in college and all of that stuff, for some of us anyway, that went to college way back when. But I think culture, sort of starting to change people's mind on this experimentation and understanding why this kind of stuff is helpful. Like even at Sumo, and we are a relatively young company, we used to sometimes struggle, with like, oh my God, we have to stop the deployments because we're coming close to the end of the quarter. What would happen to all the new deals if we were, pushing bad code? And just all of that has to kind of change. You have to embrace kind of this model of thinking about failure all the time and actually believing in it, that will eventually end up in a better place than if you just constantly try to keep yourself from ever experiencing it.
So
I thought it was interesting
yeah, please go ahead.
I thought it was interesting that there's at least 10% less crazy people, or people that think it's crazy, in today's poll, right? So, to be thinking this way, it reminds me of other crazy things in the past. The cloud made load testing more common and possible, and when I boned up on a few things before this panel. So Sam, I didn't come into this cold. I wanted to make sure that I knew some of the newer things that were going on, because it's been a couple of years for me. But one of the experiments that I looked at, it literally took injecting load onto a live system for granted. It said, oh, to do this experiment, start driving some load into your system with your load testing tool of choice, and then inject latency into one of the services, right? So a prerequisite was, oh my gosh, load testing in production, right? And I was at a company years ago when the cloud was new, right? That introduced that concept and fought with conference audiences about doing that crazy thing,
Right.
And so it's not crazy, right? It's pragmatic. And the safer it is to do these things, the more confident we get in being able to do, inject load in a live production system, then many, many more things become possible. And ultimately, we'll talk today, I hope, about, plugging this all into a continuous integration framework, right? Where you're injecting chaos as part of your automated approach, and that is far less common right now, as I've found through polls. And but I think fast forward a couple of years, and you'll see that that's a very common practice as well.
And by that, you're not saying, Emily, I see your hand. Thank you. By that, you're not saying like rip out part of the deployment before you deploy it and see what happens. You're not injecting failure at that.
Well, there was this thing in 2009 called Chaos Monkey, but we won't. Maybe we'll get there eventually.
Yeah, I remember that for sure. All right, great. Thank you, Brad. Emily.
Yeah, so kind of to Brad's point too, I think we didn't mention this in terms of getting started, is one of the core tenets of chaos engineering is understanding your steady state, because you can't form hypothesis without getting the steady state. And so sometimes you really just need to start by, am I actually monitoring my systems? Am I monitoring my CI/CD pipelines? Do I actually understand my failure rate? And so honestly, a lot of my customers don't. And so that's actually the first step. Chaos engineering is still a few more steps away, because if you don't have that holistic insight into your steady state, you're not going to be able to be successful with chaos engineering easily. You could still work around it, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
Right. And Jim, a few minutes ago, asked, like, how do you capture that digital exhaust to understand things? And I think that goes right back to what you were just saying, which is it's an experiment. I love the way that you put the science back in computer science. You have a hypothesis, you have a lab with ingredients or whatever it is that you're testing, and you have variables that haven't changed. So you understand how everything runs right now. And then you start changing variables one at a time. And to your point, Bruno, about holding back deployments, right? That's fine. You're holding back deployments, but it's like a big dam. Now there's a bunch of water. All of a sudden you let all that water go. What's going to happen downstream, right? Which particle of water was the one that knocked that tree down? Well, I'm not really sure, because there's so much water. So that continuous mindset, I think, is really important. The other thing that I wanted to just throw out there, you're talking about maybe there's something where the mean time to resolution is more important than a mean time between failure, right? Allowing yourselves to fail more often, but being able to resolve it very quickly because you're practiced at it, allows you to lean in a little bit more or be more innovative or
That's interesting.
whatever, right? I made that up. I don't know.
There you go.
Sure, somebody else made it up first, but I just put it out there. It's a question for the audience. I'd love to hear what your thoughts
Another
are.
worthwhile quote.
Is MTTR greater than MTBF, right? And then the other thing, Brad, you mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, was feeling safer. And so my question back to you was safer how, right? Psychologically, for the teams to know that it's okay for failure to happen in a system, or technically, right? Safer because I know that when I fail, I have a process or I have some way of getting that resolution. So which way?
Yeah, a key require. What's very important in any of the tooling that you choose is your ability to roll back and stop the tests, right? So that's that's one of the areas of feeling safer as a practitioner. And I'd love to get Bryce's perspective on, how do you make your team safer in doing these things? But that's the first level. But at the end of the day, you could expand that out to feeling safer that your systems are going to fail gracefully if and when they fail, right? So I think it spans the spectrum, but great point.
Nice. That was your point. I was just repeating it. So that's great.
Well, what safe means is a good one, right?
Yeah, I love that. All right, fantastic. So any other comments on this? Like I said, folks, put it in the chat there. MTTR, MTBF. Which one do you think is the more important one for focusing on?
I was just noting, Sam, we've talked about resiliency before, and that's this idea that all software fails and you can't prevent everything from happening, which is why we're doing chaos engineering. So this is important about how we handle a fault, how we recover from it, or how we're resilient from it. Security world is kind of starting to wake up to this idea too, that everybody will be hacked.
Right.
In varying forms at different times. It's so your incident response is just as important as your prevention. So same thing in software, right? All software fails.
Right.
It's up on the Hubble Space Telescope, or it's sitting in the cloud here on Earth.
So, but it's funny now. Another quote: "An ounce of cure is worth a pound of prevention." Is that what we're saying? I don't know. Right?
Yeah.
No. Bruno's shaking his head. He doesn't like that one.
Well,
So
prevention, right?
You can try to prevent a cold, but you're going to get one eventually, right?
Well, I mean, you can. That depends on how you think about it, right? Is sort of experimenting and learning how things fail. Is that prevention, or is that cure? If you're blowing things up before it ever happened, seems to me like you get yourself some deadened virus into your arm, to see, to prepare you for the future when it actually hits. I don't know.
Maybe it's building up your resiliency.
Yeah, Bruno, that was the analogy used, in the past. COVID probably didn't help that, right? But literally, it was injecting something into the system that would cause a problem, and then you could then identify and kind of cure that problem, so that if it happens in real life, it didn't happen. But yeah, that's interesting, right? Is it a cure or a prevention? I mean, that's actually a good point. I'm not 100% sure.
There's another part to this, Sam, that the correlation isn't one-to-one. In other words, we might inject A and we see symptom B, but that may not be directly attributable. So the whole skill of doing the analysis and kind of in a quality world, like the Pareto chart analysis or whatever technique you want to use, of really trying to understand what's happening before drawing a final conclusion, because it's not always, yes, this face got full and X happened, but that actually was caused by 4 other problems that rippled to the final thing we saw happen.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Awesome. All right. Well, we are chewing up the time here. We got a lot of great stuff to talk about. I love all of the folks in chat. I appreciate you. Challenges and good practices. What are you seeing out there that's working? What are you seeing out there that is hard for people? And Bruno, I'm going to start with you.
All right. So, my little research here at Sumo is what we are. We're not, as a company, we haven't been doing this for that long, right? This is a relatively new practice. Probably was spurred by Bryce's presentation at Sumo. And so what we're seeing is sort of we're at that stage where we're running this actively, but we are still at kind of get the developers on board stage. It's still kind of coming out of QA primarily. QA is building the tooling and making this, according to our QA team, a one-click kind of a self-service, right? And they're essentially attempting to get this to start first for some of the new assemblies and things like that, making it very easy for developers to do it, making it pretty safe at the beginning, right? We are sort of in pre-production, but we're in the staging system where we're still doing this. We're not even in the sort of the soak system. We're in the staging system where we're doing this. And so I think right now we are at that cultural shift, breaking the cultural biases and having people kind of pick up this as a practice. And I think so I think that's not a bad way to go, is to get people more comfortable. And I think that you got to start somewhere. Like, I wish we were farther along now, knowing more about this, but we are doing this. We found some pretty important things with some of these tests already that just like similar to what Bryce was saying, ours wasn't Redis cache. We do test our Redis down as well, where we were testing something like I think ours was a memcache outage, and we realized that nobody could log in if that went down, even though behind it there was a live data store, right, that could have been routed to. And so we fixed that, and boom, right? So
resilience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic. Okay, anyone else want to go, or I'll pick on someone? All right, Mitch.
Well, I like the way, Bruno, I like the way that you kind of set up the response, or set up the answer of, it is affected as much by us as humans. We are part of the system. It isn't just software, right? So if you think about it systemically, it has to be us and our response, or us and what we do, that may cause an effect of this. So not to get too metaphysical about it, I don't mean to do that, but if you're truly going to look at it systemically, and then there's a conversation going on in chat about, is the human bias influencing what we're chaos testing itself? Of course it is, right? Unless you're using software that truly is chaos monkey. But even in that, there's assumptions in that software, the tool, and how it's built. So I don't think we can avoid bias, but I think we can do things to challenge our bias about the assumptions that we're making, tools that we're using. The biggest thing, I think, is learning. That's the real outcome that we're going for. We're trying to expand our understanding and then make improvements from that.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay.
Emily was raising her hand while you're looking.
Emily.
So one of the biggest challenges I see is language. So when someone is trying to, whether that's a QA, IT ops developer, trying to implement chaos engineering, sometimes just don't call it that. Think of a different term. Think of something that is already used within your organization so that it doesn't feel unnatural. At a lot of banks, actually, they do implement chaos engineering, but they don't call it that. And so they may call it redundancy testing or failure testing or something else. And they go through an intense checklist of what happens if I turn off all my storage. Do the apps still work? And it is fascinating to see some of the chaos engineering they're doing, but they don't actually call it that. And so sometimes just language is the biggest hurdle when adopting new DevOps practices.
I love that. That is so great, to make it approachable and not scary for people. I love the idea of chaos engineering. I think that's so cool. It's so fun to talk about, but I can see how people who are not comfortable with that would be averted to it, right? There's an
I plus one that for sure, particularly in financial services and highly governed companies. But resiliency and reliability are two terms that nobody will disagree on, right? So I think those help out a lot.
Excellent. So Brad, why don't you keep talking? Any other challenges or good practices that you see or have seen?
Yeah, I think that the challenge is cultural. I think one of the conferences not too long ago was all about cultural, right? So, and I think terminology and bias. I mean, what a great side conversation, or maybe even primary conversation to take this down, because the word chaos, there's bias associated with chaos, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, so just choosing the terms that make sense for your team is important. I think the challenge is just getting teams to change. Bruno, I love the fact that your QA and test team is doing chaos engineering. That means they're broadening their horizons and looking at how they can impact, make an impact on the company and customer success in a better way. The practices that I think that I love, I think we've already talked about them. Game days. I think game days are something that everyone should be doing. The other practice that I really keyed into, and it's one of the oldest ones in chaos engineering, is the fire drill practice. Right, it's the concept of actually causing something that requires all teams, operations, development, the IT management teams, everyone to be on alert to something that's going to happen. It can be very controlled, or it can be out of control, right? But the idea is getting people that need to respond to problems actually responding to problems. And so the fire drill concept is one that I think that as you're a little bit evolved in your chaos engineering practices, you begin to implement fire drills, right? That gets, maybe it does work at night, right? I mean, these are the things that really do happen. And so I think the fire drill concept is something that you can look into. And again, all this stuff is so prominent on an internet search. All you got to do is do fire drill chaos engineering, and you'll get a lot of great practices on it.
So Mitch just posed an interesting question. Should we be intentional about destructive versus non-destructive chaos engineering, particularly when it comes to data and not losing data? And I would just ask, if people are doing stuff in pre-production, then you're golden, right? You don't need to worry about ruining data. But if you're like, Bryce, I'm going to use your example of your website, right? And if the website is down, you're not necessarily destructive of data, but you may be losing new data, transactions that can't get through. If the website,
unless it's basic economy.
Unless it's what? Yeah. But that's an insider airlines joke, I guess.
I'm trying.
Yeah, no, it's good. But is that, what have people thought about that? Because that's destructive. So Mitch, where were you going with that question?
Well, I think, data loss is always sort of where we get into, bad territory if we're in a production environment. There's disruptive and there's destructive. So maybe we have, degrees of, well, where do we push up against the boundary? I'm thinking of kind of what Brad and Emily were talking about, of like using terms that we're already familiar with within the organization. So if we venture into destructive, particularly for data, I think that works against our cause, even though it still may be valid and something worth knowing. But if we're losing data to the business, that's hard to recover from.
That's not good. Yeah. That's not good. All those orders, those are gone. Sorry.
Right?
I would argue that. I don't think that's what we're talking about, though, right? Key tenets of chaos engineering are rollback and recovery and blast radius, right? So, again, this is science, and you're rolling these chaos experiments out in a very controlled environment with full capability to roll back to the steady state, as Emily pointed out. Bryce, I'd love to hear about kind of some of your concepts around blast radius and protecting end user experience. Are you doing production testing?
No, we're not doing production yet.
But you're learning from systems that are just like production to be able to apply those learnings to production, like your cache example.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Excellent. All right. I think we have one more topic.
Can I
go
speak?
ahead? Oh, Bryce, I'm so sorry. Yeah, your turn.
Yes. So I guess on challenges, one of the challenges that we had was generating load, because we've been working in non-prod environments. if you don't have load, you can't really observe anything. So it took us a while to find some tools that would work to generate load for us. Another thing that I thought was interesting was when we first started using Kubernetes, I got really excited because there's tons of tools out there that can break all sorts of stuff in Kubernetes for you. And I think we've been talking about the experiment approach to chaos engineering, but there's also the chaos monkey kind of chaos engineering where you just have something running automatically at random, tearing things down, breaking things, and you're not doing it. It's just happening at random. I got really excited and I tried to do one of those things. And the problem I ran into is that we did not have great observability in Kubernetes because we were still new to it and we hadn't really figured it out. So we couldn't really see what the tool was doing. So we didn't get any value out of it. And I think because of the challenge with load and a tool like that, I think that's a tool that would be better in production. But I think you've got to be really mature with your culture and your practices around other chaos engineering before you get to playing with that sort of thing. Another thing, a challenge that we run into is my team has been running all these game days, and that's kind of the main approach we've been taking to chaos engineering is running these game days. But we started to realize that even if we did like a game day a month or every 2 weeks, that's not scaling. There are so many teams that we can only get to a team like once or twice a year at that rate. And so we realized that we need to shift from running this with the teams to enabling the teams, to providing them with the tools and teaching them how to use these things without us. I think getting it worked into pipelines, we're not there, but I think that's going to be huge. That's going to normalize it and make it a lot easier. Yeah.
I like that. And Brad, that was something that you had mentioned earlier, is having that be sort of part and parcel with the process. Now, is that part and parcel with the process into production, or is that part and parcel of the process into pre-production? That's a lot of P's there. Part and parcel of the for pre-production.
Well executed, Sam. Nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I don't have an example of a company that does it in production. I wish I did, and I'll keep looking. But arguably, Chaos Monkey was a production utility at Netflix. So I'd even dig into that history and see if that was actually something that was automatically introduced, right? So I would argue, and Bryce, you're perfectly correct in that you take steps. But I'm a proponent of and student of Kosuke Kawaguchi, who invented Jenkins, right? If you're repeating something, then you can automate it, right? So the minute something becomes automated, you should start thinking about, I mean, it becomes repeatable, then think about how you can automate it. And, CI frameworks, CD frameworks have been doing that for a long, long time. So it's feasible, but it's not the first thing you do, right, Bryce?
Right.
Yeah.
Love that. All right. We're running low on time. We have one more question to ask. Before I get to the question, though, I want to make sure that Bill Z, Hilda N, Samuel U, and hopefully I'm saying the name correctly, Lakan I. You've got Amazon gift certificate that will be coming your way. So thank you for joining. Thank everybody for joining. I just didn't want to forget to say that. I always end up forgetting, and so that's kind of dumb. So next slide. How do you measure the benefits? We've all talked about what we believe the benefits are, but how do you measure that? What are some of those things that you use to measure? Let's see. I'll start with, Bryce, I'm going to start with you. I'm starting with you, Bryce. All right.
All right. So I don't actually have a great way to measure like any sort of metric. I mean, I guess one of the big reasons that we do it is for the learning experience, and it's hard to measure how much the teams are learning. But I suppose, like, if it's really working, we should see fewer incidents, or at least the duration of the incidents should be shorter.
Okay. Emily?
Better sleep.
So I prefer to measure it by decreasing superhero time and firefighting time. So if you can track, especially with particular teams, obviously this exercise would be a lot harder if you're talking about across many, many teams. But if you're looking at the last 6 months, okay, how much extra time did each of the individuals spend in firefighting mode in something in production? How much time did someone spend, or how many calls did they get at 2 a.m. because there was a problem? How many days did they lose of actual work because of problems and incidents and all of that? So there's kind of that piece, as well as the customer experience. How many customers have been affected by any incidents? So if you take those two things, and it kind of goes back to the steady state, so you need to actually have that data. But if you can improve your employees' lives and your customers' experience, then that's a win. If you do chaos engineering perfectly, but you can't improve either of those things, then you're not doing it perfectly.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I love that. And the superhero time thing, I think that's Ben on the line also sort of talked about that. Basically, just better sleep, right, for the on-call engineers. Right, they don't get woken up at 2 a.m. It's brilliant. I love it. Let's see, Brad, what are your thoughts here?
Keen on being able to collect data, right? So, and it is difficult here, but I think mean time to resolution is one of those factors that you can look at before and after, running, beginning. It's not going to happen after the first chaos engineering experiment, right? But it's one of the things that you want to get better at.
Unless you get really lucky, like Bryce did, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, that's good, and that's instant career advancement. But you got to put some way to measure it in. So I think, and it's hard to measure. I've got some benefits written down here. Increased resiliency and reliability. Those are kind of hard to measure, right? So you look at, just customer sats, a key one. Jim mentioned that. Customer satisfaction. If you're doing any kind of customer facing, commerce sites or whatever, you are measuring customer satisfaction. So whether it's one question in those customer sat surveys or whatever, that's what it really amounts to. Is are you serving your customers in a good way, and are they noticing when things go down? So I think implementing the means to be able to measure customer sat is really, really key. And then I think what's so key to DevOps is collaboration and communication. Again, hard to measure. So you want to implement a means to be able to talk about, hey, are the practices in chaos engineering impacting, developers' ability to release code without worrying about the implications, right? So it's less, numerically measurable, but it's certainly something you should be checking and polling, because if you're not checking if feedback is working, then you're not doing DevOps properly. So
yeah, feedback loops are important. Observing what happened is the most important part of an experiment. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. So agree with that as well. Mitch.
I would add two things. One, I think you always benefit ourselves if we talk about the customer experience. What things that we find that have an impact on customer experiences positively or negatively that we've improved. Because it's really easy to look inward, and that's important too with the things about how we work inside of a software organization. But ultimately, that's one of the big, of course, drivers for the business. If you're going to be presenting, our results, you want to put it in business valuable terms, right? That's a good one. I think the other is, I kind of look at faults in the system, and whether that's processes, software, people, our mindset, things we've uncovered that have led us to other positive outcomes. Now, this is a little bit more of a softer one, kind of what you were talking about, Brad. But because we did this, we now have made the following improvements. Some of them preventative, some of them improving our mean time to recovery, whatever it might be. But by doing that, we would not have found this, or would not have found it as quickly because we're doing these game days or chaos engineering. So you can connect the dots. And now, can you put a price tag on all those things? No, but you can say these are things that will bring down, our customer experience, our SLAs or SRIs or whatever, SLOs. So I think there's a couple ways to look at that, but you can never go wrong by looking at the customer.
Yeah, and I love that. And actually, June 14th, we've got Mitch and Bruno will be back with us, along with some folks from Acquia and Ulta Beauty, to talk about the business impact of digital customer experience. So make sure you join us for that, another episode of this fantastic program. Bruno, can you bring us home?
I mean, look, it's measuring this is hard, piecing things. The hardest thing here is kind of like, when you're trying to lose weight, you exercise, you reduce your diet, improve your diet, you eat more things, you change the schedule of eating, all that stuff. Figuring out what is it that's driving the ultimate goal, which is the better, more reliable delightful customer experience, right? And that's measured by MTTIs, MTTRs, MTBFs, whatever they are, right? It's the attribution, because we're sort of relatively early in the stage of chaos. It's the attribution of the benefit of chaos to the improvement in those metrics that's the harder part. It's convincing people that doing this actually drives those metrics. And I think you just have to measure things and holistically and try to find evidence and find sort of reasons to continue driving this effort. I do believe in it, and but I don't think it's an easy answer. And I would love for somebody to actually figure this out and let us know.
Yeah,
I would like Dora metrics for chaos specifically.
Some standard stuff. Well, get working on it, Bruno. We'd love to see what you publish. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you to the panelists for sharing your wisdom and your learnings with the crowd. We're all trying to figure this out. Thank you to the chat. You folks were awesome today. It was really switched on, and I loved it. We'll see you next month for the digital impact, the experience. Wow, I just totally biffed that one. The business impact of digital customer experience. Looking forward to seeing everybody there as well. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.